Horn was confidently checking his vote to block the deal.
We have over 25% of the votes, and we don't think the UTC Fiat proposals, therefore, will be passed.
Are you absolutely sure you've got over 25%?
I'm absolutely sure on our figures that we have, yes.
If the Sikorsky deal is blocked, Westlands are talking of contingency plans, which means reworking the American deal. But they say they'd still refuse to countenance the European proposals. But they've a more immediate problem, just sorting out the arrangements.
10,500 people could turn up, that's the shareholders. That's probably unlikely, but we, for our part, are having to lay on an awful lot of stewards. We have 50 security guards, registrars, catering. It really is quite a performance.
And what's all this costing?
Well, it's difficult to say precisely, but I would think the adjourned meeting at the Connaught Rooms the other day, plus the Albert Hall, is probably the best part of £250,000.
And who's going to pay for that?
Unfortunately, the shareholders at the end of the day.
So, as preparations continue, as Lord Hanson showed today, there could still be more surprises in store in this amazing saga.
Hanson Trust ranks amongst Britain's top 10 companies. It's known in the city for shrewd takeovers, and the £11 million it splashed out on Westland shares is chicken feed by its standards. Hanson sees itself as a transatlantic operation, as its logo shows. The company's worth about £2 billion. Among its British interests are Everready Batteries, the London Brick Company and Alder's department store chain. Hanson also runs a small helicopter hire business in Surrey and considered making a takeover bid when Westland was in trouble last year. So what are its motives this time? Hansons are being coy about why they've bought Westland shares well over the odds. They say they're a good long-term investment. But some city men believe Hanson may be playing a longer game.
It's not impossible that one contingency could be some kind of tie-up between Sikorsky, with whom, as Lord Hanson said, he's worked very effectively in the past, and whom one has to assume he favours in this deal, between Sikorsky, Fiat and Hanson. A deal which would have politically, I suppose, the added advantage of having a British involvement.
So if the Europeans do block the American bid tomorrow, all eyes will be on Hanson's next move.
And there'll be a special programme starting at 10:15 tomorrow morning on BBC One, when we'll bring you the latest news from the Westland shareholders meeting as it happens.
One of Mrs Thatcher's former ministers, James Pryor, has said he won't be standing at the next election. He left the cabinet over a year ago and is now chairman of GEC. But although GEC are known supporters of the European consortium in the Westland affair, Mr Pryor says recent events have nothing to do with his decision to leave Westminster.
No, nothing at all. I mean, I think some people will say, well, it's typical of Jim Pryor to make that particular decision in this week, but I've made it some while ago, and I didn't want to stop the, as it were, the wheels turning, and I think it's important the constituency should be able to get on and select someone else.
The big cricket and rugby union grounds are being told to tighten up safety and crowd control in the same way as soccer grounds. It's part of the final recommendations from Mr Justice Popplewell, who was asked to investigate crowd safety after the Bradford fire last year. He also says the police and fire officers should be given greater powers. The government has said it will introduce the new measures soon.
After the horrors of Bradford and Brussels, Mr Justice Popplewell's inquiry team has recommended the most stringent review of safety standards British sport has ever known. Since his first report, football has done much to try and put its house in order. Now other sports like cricket and rugby are to be forced to do the same. Though they don't suffer from the same hooligan problems, safety for spectators in grounds capable of holding 10,000 or more is a major worry. So the government have agreed that these too should be subjected to precisely the same safety checks. And there'll have to be inspections every year from safety experts who will have powers to shut down grounds not up to the mark. On soccer violence, the Popplewell inquiry team say lessons simply have to be learnt from the Heysel Stadium disaster. Too many English fans had far too much to drink, too few of them were searched on the way in. So the judge wants proper control of ticket sales for big games to ensure effective segregation of fans, increased police powers to deal with hooligans, and a new offence of disorderly conduct at sports grounds. but he's now changed his mind on banning away fans and would be prepared to see the drinks ban lifted in executive boxes.
I've concluded that really violence is with us, and that while you can take some steps to control it, you'll never stop it, and that all that is presently happening, I believe, is that it's being moved from inside the ground to outside the ground.
What we can do, I think, within the scope that Parliament can act and that the law can act and that safety regulations can act, we can help make things that bit safer and hooliganism that bit more dangerous for the hooligans.
The Popplewell team also feel the players must shoulder more responsibilities. They single out the professional foul or plain cheating as a cause of increasing tension on the terraces. But they say some of the childish behaviour of tennis stars and cricketers is a good deal worse.
A leading member of the Sikh community in Britain has been shot outside his home near Heathrow Airport. Mr. Sankta Singh Sandhu, thought to be a leading member of the official Akali Dal party, is in hospital with serious eye and ear injuries. Police believe he may be a victim of political extremism.
Britain and France are tonight trying to work out a final deal on a fixed link across the Channel. The decision's due to be announced by Mrs. Thatcher and President Mitterrand when they meet in France on Monday. Tonight, the Transport Secretary, Nicholas Ridley, is in Paris trying to sort out the details. A combined road and rail scheme looks like being the final choice. James Long has been across the Channel himself to look into the French connection.
In France, the public relations battle for the Channel contract is going full tilt right to the end. Self-styled builders of ambition, Euroroute, with their weary video Seagull, are also weary about the rough way the game's been played.
I generally think that after the project has been selected, probably the work will be open. In the case of big projects such as our project, there is no difficulty on that, and we are prepared to do so. The first thing is to select a good project and not to recommend or make arm twisting in favor of one of them.
In the race to win the backing of the French Transport Ministry, some rivals make private allegations of double dealing and attempts at bribery. More straightforward lobbying has come from French Railways, the SNCF pressing hard for a scheme to let it link London and Paris in 3 hours by superfast train. Through this jungle, the French Transport Minister is trying to steer a straight path.
Il faut que la décision soit claire.
The decision must be clear. One solution must be chosen with one consortium. Beyond that, we are open-minded.
Most of the French people don't seem to care whether it's built or not, but it could bring thousands of new jobs to the depressed northeastern towns around Lille, where Monday's announcement will take place. With terrorist bombs a familiar sight in Paris, it could also bring that threat to the tunnel. Patrols and surveillance cameras should stop bombs being left in the tunnel. Trains will be checked closely.
Here at the Paris headquarters of the French equivalent of MI5, we've learnt that they consider a suicide bomber to be the greatest threat to the tunnel. In secret discussions with the British security services, they've drawn up plans to isolate any section of the tunnel threatened by a bomb. And plans are under consideration for new high-technology explosive sniffers to detect explosives in cars as they enter the tunnel.
At the moment, the Channel is a useful barrier to all that, but it's also, say the French, a damaging barrier to proper understanding between Britain and France. And that, they say, is why this project is so important.
The Russians and the Americans have met in Geneva for their first arms control talk since the Reagan-Gorbachev summit last November. The Americans were presented with the latest Soviet suggestion, the elimination of nuclear weapons everywhere by the year 2000, on condition that the Americans scrap their Star Wars research program. Tonight, Washington rejected another Soviet proposal to freeze the testing of nuclear weapons.
There's been fierce fighting in South Yemen for a fourth day running. Tonight, talks are reported to be underway at the Soviet embassy in the capital Aden between hardline Marxist rebels and the forces backing President Ali Nasser Mohammed. The first pictures of the present fighting have reached London, and Grant Mansfield has been looking at them.
It's 4 days now since a rival wing of the Marxist leadership in South Yemen attempted to seize power. The government says an attempted coup has been foiled, but the fighting continues. Much of it centres on the capital, the port of Aden, where gunboats have been using foreign merchant vessels as cover while firing at tanks on the shore. However, it's still not clear who controls these gunboats, the rebels or the government. Indeed, it's not even clear who controls the country at the moment. The former British colony has adopted close ties with Russia since independence 9 years ago, but the Soviets today denied any part in the attempted coup. The South Yemen government insists it's still in charge, but reports from the Gulf tonight point to a continuing power struggle and more heavy fighting.
Thousands of young white South Africans reported for national service today. They're joining an army which is heavily involved in trying to keep order in the country's black townships. The conscripted men form almost 3/4 of the South African army, but there's a lot of resistance to their 2 years' service.
By 5 o'clock this morning, this Johannesburg stadium was packed with white families and girlfriends, seeing their boys off for the annual call-up. 2 years national service is compulsory for all white men, the start of a continuing military obligation to the state that will last until they're 55. There was much commotion and mixed ideas of what to expect. This enforced conscription is the main reason white families give for considering leaving South Africa. But the Republic's powerful military machine depends on the 60,000 conscripts. The tiny force of regulars exists only to train and organise them. The first morning in the army, breakfast by 6:30. Their belongings searched by MPs for illicit alcohol and drugs.
The call-up by now is a practiced and efficient routine. The difference this year is that these soldiers may find themselves fighting close to home.
Until last year, the Army's combat role was entirely played in the remote bush, the border wars in Namibia and Angola, where white South African troopers fought and sometimes died in clashes with SWAPO guerrillas. But now thousands of conscripts have been ordered into the Republic's black townships to suppress internal dissent. The issues here of patriotism and justice are less clear-cut, and the army has been drawn deep into the politics of a divided country. An emotional campaign is underway here to end conscription. It remains merely a radical minority, but the presence of troops in the townships has given it new impetus. As the new recruits and their families arrived today, the army gave them a pamphlet justifying their role, which many didn't seem to question anyway.
At the moment, it hasn't actually sunk in that I'm actually going there. But I suppose it's something that I have to do because everybody else has to do it, so I'll just have to do it.
For most white men here, there is no choice. The penalty for avoiding the call-up is 6 years' jail. Only a handful are accepted as conscientious objectors. It's just part of the reality of being white in South Africa. This is Michael Burke for the 9 o'clock news in South Africa.
The French government have ordered South Africa's military attaché to leave their country and will not allow him to be replaced. They said the expulsion was in line with restrictions agreed by European Community foreign ministers last September. South Africa's military attaché in Britain has not yet been expelled.
The England football captain Brian Robson hopes to be playing again next week. He's being treated in Amsterdam for a leg injury he's had since last year, and he thinks he'll soon be fit enough to resume his training for the World Cup. Mark Austin reports.
Since Brian Robson limped off during England's World Cup qualifier against Turkey in October, the injury-hit England captain has played only 14 minutes competitive football. But now Robson is fighting back to fitness at this Canalside clinic in Amsterdam. Robson arrives early each day for 10 hours of intensive treatment. He's in the hands of Richard Smith, a young Dutch sports injury expert who specialises in treating top European footballers. While concentrating on Robson's troublesome right leg, the emphasis is on unusual stretching exercises, a routine completely new to Robson.
Yes, there is difference in technique. I mean, I've always thought I could do stomach exercises, no problem, and maybe just do about 150 of them. Where I've been shown a new technique how to do it now. Rather than jerking up, you've got to roll up, and all of a sudden I'm only doing about 25.
But today, Robson was anxious to refute stories that injury threatened his future career, and his Dutch physiotherapist agrees.
And you're confident he'll be playing for England in the World Cup, are you?
I think he could be playing in a few weeks already, so it's no problem for the World Cup anyhow.
That soon?
It's very soon, yes.
Just how accurate an assessment that is won't be known for a few days yet, and they promise to be gruelling days for Brian Robson.
And the main soccer match here tonight is the FA Cup third round replay between West Bromwich Albion and Sheffield Wednesday. And the result, West Brom 2, Sheffield Wednesday 3.
Finally, the tale of a dog loved and lost. When her pet Dusty disappeared 3 months ago, Teresa Kirk was heartbroken. She went to help out at a Hampshire animal centre to get over it. Then something extraordinary happened.
I walked right along the block, and when I got to the other end of the block, I thought there was a dog back there I recognised. So I just went back there and it was Dusty. I just couldn't believe it. I mean, I could have burst into tears with joy. I just screamed.
Dusty was also overjoyed at being reunited with Teresa. Now she says he'll be kept on a very short lead.
And the main news again tonight, the arrest of 2 IRA men who'd been on the run since they broke out of the Maze prison in 1983. Brendan McFarlane and Gerard Kelly are being held by police in Amsterdam, where they were picked up this afternoon.
Leon Britton has again insisted he won't resign over the Westland affair, and he's apparently won the support of the Cabinet.
And Judge Popplewell has said many more sports grounds in Britain should have better safety and security measures. And that's the national and international news tonight. From Julia and me, good night.
Good night.
Good evening. The headlines in the southeast this Thursday evening. A Middlesex man who's a member of the Sikh religious party Akali Dal is undergoing emergency surgery tonight after being shot in the face. The shooting happened when Sangtar Singh Sandhu was parking his car at his home in Cranford. A man leapt out of nearby bushes firing a shotgun. The police haven't said whether or not they suspect a political motive. A major teaching union says London teachers are suffering increasing violence in the classroom. The National Association of Schoolmasters and Women Teachers says there are far more than the 250 assaults reported each year.
One of the main problems, of course, is that no school wishes to be identified as a school with a disruptive problem, because that would immediately target the school in the eyes of the local community.
An inquest has heard that 2 bank robbers died together rather than go to prison. Charlie Ijogo and girlfriend Norma Clark were fleeing after an armed raid when their car crashed at Hatton Cross. Ijogo then used a revolver to shoot Clark before turning the gun on himself. Louis Farrakhan, the American black Muslim leader, is to be stopped from entering Britain. As we reported on Tuesday, Farrakhan's angered Jewish groups here by apparently suggesting that Hitler was a good man. Now the Home Secretary has forbidden Farrakhan to enter the country. 3 people are still in hospital after last night's coach crash on the M4 in Berkshire. The coach collided with a lorry near Reading on its way back to the West Country after a shopping trip in London. GEC Avionics, which is based at Rochester, has won a £30 million contract to supply aircraft parts to China. But at High Wycombe, 300 jobs are to be lost at the GD Searle Pharmaceuticals factory. And there are also 100 redundancies at the DRG Paperworks at Northfleet in Kent. That's it for now. There'll be more South East news throughout the day tomorrow, starting at breakfast time. Join us then.
Hello. Well, I suppose, lads, if we're really looking for something nice to say about the south, we have to admit that it's just a little bit warmer on the whole than it is in the north. Not all the time, though, but it certainly has been today. But I should add straight away that some parts of central and western England and Wales are having snow at the moment from this little nuisance of a low which is rushing down the Irish Sea at the moment towards France and the Low Countries. That's where it's going to be by this time tomorrow. And this next front coming along just as quickly later tomorrow, spreading rain, not snow, in from the west. And with these strong winds coming along, it does look like most of it are going to have a breezy and very changeable but never desperately cold weekend. Any snow over the weekend is likely, I think, to be confined to the higher hills, and those only in the north as well. So a changeable but relatively mild weekend with rain at times coming. But let's come back and have a look at tonight's weather, because there is some snow at the moment over western and central parts of England and Wales, an area of cloud, some rain, sleet or snow. The rain on low ground, I think, in the west, but inland, sleet and snow in places. It could give, on some of the high ground, an inch or two of snow in places. It now looks as if eastern parts of England are going to miss the snow by and large and stay essentially dry overnight, perhaps no more than the odd flurry of snow in places. It's already just about dry over most of Scotland, and that dry weather is gradually going to work its way southwards during the night. Some patches of ice and fog later in the night too. And frost in quite a number of places. Not too cold, but -1 or so is 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomorrow, that cloudy area with sleet in places in the south, gradually working its way into France during the course of the morning. Most of it dry and bright for a time, but more rain getting into western Scotland and Northern Ireland by the end of the morning. And that rain coming across many northern and western parts of Britain by the end of the afternoon. By the end of the day, too, temperatures rising quite reasonably, 6 Celsius, 43 degrees Fahrenheit. And then finally, a summary of the weather then. Well, some snow or rain in the south at first, a lot of dry weather, but more rain coming along from the west later on. And then the outlook, as I've said, rain or sleet at times, the sleet on the northern hills only. Good night.
Where's Lovejoy?
Tomorrow at 9:30, Ian McShane stars as that irrepressible rogue, Lovejoy.
You know what that is, don't you, Mr. Lovejoy?
I can see it's not a singing telegram.
What about that, then?
What about it?
18th century all-oak Welsh dresser.
The minute that dresser goes down, I want you and Tinker to strap it on the roof rack. I want you behind the wheel and the engine running, okay?
Lot 110, a Welsh dresser, 18th century, solid seasoned oak. A spectacular piece.
Lovejoy.
What?
Lovejoy.
What is it?
Boys, I think it's...
That's Lovejoy, tomorrow at 9:30 on BBC One. Flight from Vatersay, the 40-minute documentary on BBC Two in a couple of minutes, tells the story of Neil Gillies, a young man from the Outer Hebrides who left behind a life of isolation, unemployment and boredom to find his way in the uncompromising city of Glasgow. Here on One, in half an hour, Sir Robin Day chairs another debate in Question Time. But now it's black by name and black by nature, as Rowan Atkinson chops his way mercilessly through the history books in Blackadder 2.